Hello there everyone. Today I want to talk a little bit about wire weaving tension. So first off I want to just say there is no right and wrong in the tension that you use when you do your wire weaving, but there are a few things that can determine if what you're doing is suitable for the project, because it also depends on the project, whether how tight you want to do your wire weaving or if you want to do it a bit looser. It really depends on what you're doing. And also it's quite a personal thing. It's very different from person to person who does what, how tight you weave. I tend to weave quite tightly myself, and the same when I do macrame, I tend to tie my knots quite tightly. But like I said, that's very personal. So I'm just going to be doing a bit of a demonstration, and then also hopefully give some hints and tips that might help you if you feel like you need to work a little bit on your wire weaving tension. So here I have a little test piece that I'm working on, and what I have is just 1mm wire as the base wires, and then I'm using 0.4 here as the weaving wire. So that's generally quite often what you'll find is common to use. Obviously the same things apply for other gauges of wire as well. So this is just what I'm going to be demonstrating with, and the weave that I'm doing here, I've already done a tutorial on that, so you can check that out if you want to. But otherwise, then the usual way, most common probably, that people tend to wrap is, which is also what I tend to do most of the time, which you can kind of say it's both good and bad, but we'll get through that. So I'm going to wrap around my wire there and then push it down. So grab hold of my wire and push it down, and at the same time I'm kind of pulling a little bit on the wire to make sure it tightens up. And also I always prioritize, I want to get my weaves nice and tight when I'm doing them. It makes them a lot neater, I think. And then you just keep doing that where you're wrapping and then grabbing the wire, pushing it down. And sometimes as well you'll use your nails to help push your wire down, because obviously that's what you can get in there with. And this is definitely one way to do it, and I tend to do this a lot. There's nothing wrong with it, but there are a few things that can make it maybe not the best, or depending on the project as well. Sometimes doing it like this can tend to make quite a tight weave, and by that I mean all the wraps are quite tight. So just in case, say you wanted to do a project where you're doing a weave, but then you want to move it on your wires, so move it further up, or to make it easier to wrap maybe. So if you prefer to wrap towards the end of your wires and then move the weave down gradually, if you make your weave too tight, that can be either really difficult or actually impossible. So for instance, if I want to move these and pull it through the weave, that one is fairly easy, but usually the outer ones are easier. But I can feel it's quite tight in there, it takes a bit of force. So this way of doing it does create a bit of a tighter wrap every time you wrap your wire. And that can be an absolutely fine way of doing it, like I said, if that's what you need. Another thing is, it also tends to be a little bit slower, because every single wrap that you're doing, you're then grabbing it and doing an extra motion, so basically pushing it down as well. So like that. And then I'm grabbing it and kind of redoing, not redoing the wrap, but going over it one more time by pushing it down. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I do that a lot in my work and what I do. But that's what one of the things it can do as well. It can make it take a lot longer to do. And another thing I just want to bring up is probably something that most people don't tend to think about. I know I didn't before it kind of happened to me, but this as well, because of the way we're doing this, and we're making sure we're holding, because we're making a quite tight weave, you also tend to hold everything quite tightly and grab onto it quite tightly, both with this hand but also the actual weaving here. And obviously depending whether you're right or left-handed, but I'm right-handed, so I'm using this hand to weave with, which means this one's constantly getting motion. I'm moving this constantly, but I'm also grabbing really tight at the same time. What that can do is not necessarily be that good for your hand or your hands in general. So you could end up getting something like RSI, which is repetitive strain injury in your wrist or your hand or your arm. And that did happen to me a few months ago, which just, if you haven't tried it, it isn't fun. But also if you your work depends on it, it can be a bit of a problem. So it can be quite painful, but it can also kind of put a dampener on your work, or slow down or completely stop your work. And you also got to be careful, because it can cause long-term damage. So by being quite tight with your wrapping too much of the time, it can cause things like that as well. So I do just want to mention that it's something to be aware of. that if you do start to feel things in your hand or your arm, maybe just slow down a bit or take some breaks. So that's what I had to do. I was forced into doing the minimum that I could get away with doing to try and get it to heal as quick as possible. But that's kind of one way. And like I said, the tension on your wire weaving is quite individual. It's different from every person. But then another way to do it, something that can maybe help, is if you just start wrapping a little bit differently. So just zoomed out so you can kind of see more the motion of my hands, because that's what is going to be a little bit easier to show you with. So I'm going to keep doing the same wrap, obviously. Instead of grabbing really tight around the wires that I'm working with, also try and maybe loosen your grip a little bit more. First of all, to avoid that RSI too much, but also so you don't get your weave itself to be too tight around your base wires. One thing you can do as well, because this kind of wrapping was kind of slow as well, to speed it up but also to make it a little bit less straining on you and also make the weave itself less tight, is instead of kind of grabbing on so tight and being so focused around, that's another thing, you're grabbing towards where you're wrapping more when you're doing the tight weave. So instead of that, try and move out your wire a little bit, move a bit further out so you have more space here, and then you want to stay out there and then just start wrapping, and then you use kind of almost the tension of the wire itself. So I'm wrapping there and then I'm pulling down towards the weave that I'm making, so the wire just naturally kind of slots in place. I stay out, so I never put this hand, obviously every now and then you might want to do it just to push it down if you need to, but most of the time I just stay further out and then just continue my wrap. And then every time you're wrapping, you then push it or pull it down. And especially if you're wrapping then in between, because then your wraps here, just got to find the right one there. When you're then doing that, what this push or pull does is it helps push down the previous wraps that you've done. So it almost happens naturally instead of you being right close and using your hands or using your nails. That's something you can do as well. Plus, it speeds it up so you can go much quicker, as you can see here. You can actually end up being really quick. Now, excuse me, I just went the wrong way. Just got to get the right weave here. There. So you can get really quick if you then get into kind of a rhythm and comfortable with the weave that you're doing. You can actually end up being really quick, which obviously slows down the time you're spending on it. But also you're putting much less, in a way, effort, but strain from doing the wrap. So I'm not grabbing onto the wire as tightly, and also I'm not constantly having to go over every single wrap more than, so go over it twice almost to make sure it's always also pushed down, because the wire itself is doing that. So that's a way you can do it, maybe a way that can help you. First of all, avoid something like RSI a bit more, and then also this tends to then make your weave a little bit looser around your base wires. So it's definitely something, a good thing to be able to do this and comfortably do it. It doesn't mean it's something that I would say you should do all the time, because I don't wrap like this all the time. Because sometimes you need that kind of extra attention where you just go right down and you need to be a little bit more aware of what you're doing there. But with some wraps you can easily just go like this and just get into a rhythm where it goes much faster, but also it has much less strain on all your hands and your wrists and all that. And like I said, the weave tends to become a bit looser from it, which then makes it more easier if you then need to move your weave along your base wires. And then sometimes it can look a little bit loose, but then all you can do is go in when you've done a little section and just squeeze it together. And then that works out just fine. And usually get just as nice a result from doing this. So I do recommend trying to do this at least some of the time that you're weaving, because it does lighten the strain a little bit. And it all depends on obviously the project that you're making. So that's a little bit on the tension and the different things you can do to first of all achieve a different results, but also just to help yourself avoid as much as you can any possible strains for the future. So that was just a few tips really on some different ways you can wrap. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with being right down and close and holding it up, but also try and just feel comfortable in yourself when you're doing it. So be in a comfortable position, don't tighten up too much, because that usually goes all the way down through your hands as well and tends to give you a tighter wrap, which is also what can then cause the problems of something like RSI if you keep doing that too much over and over again. So it's just a few tips to the ways you can do it, and like neither of them are right and wrong, and you will probably find you tend to do one more because that comes naturally. But what I really just recommend is try and do them, change them up a little bit. So sometimes you can be right close, and then sometimes try and make sure you weave a little bit looser, just to give yourself a break. But also it speeds it up a bit, so you sat with it for less time. And then obviously depending on the project. So it's just a few tips on tension when you weave your wire. And like I said, it's just something as well to work on yourself, try and figure out and see what works for you. So I hoped this was a little bit helpful and gave you some tips. And otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Hello there everyone. Today I want to show you how to make this Aztec wire weave. And it looks like this. So it's a really nice and decorative weave. It's pretty simple to do once you know the technique. You get these little triangles or pyramids going all the way across. So if you want to learn how to make this weave, then stay tuned. So to make this weave, what we'll need first of all is our base wires. And in this case I'm working with 4 lengths and they're all 1 mil in thickness. Now you can easily work with more